Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. Joining me on the line, we have a special guest. He will be fighting Justin Gaethje in the main event of the Ultimate Fighter finale, Friday, July 7th, from Las Vegas. He is the menace, Michael Johnson. And Michael, thanks for coming on Beyond the Cage.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Now, of course, Michael, we're a few days, actually one day from the weigh-in of the Ultimate Fighter finale. So how's your weight looking to make 155 this time?
It's perfect, man. I'm a professional. My weight cut's never an issue. That's part of the job. It's to show up on weight, ready to fight, ready to perform, and that's the first step is making that weight. And I'm about 4 pounds over right now. Weigh-ins are tomorrow. I'm feeling good. I'm eating throughout the week, and I have plenty of energy, and I'm ready to put on a show.
Now, of course, yesterday was the 4th of July. You were already in Las Vegas for International Fight Week and everything. But if you weren't in Vegas, what would you usually do to celebrate the 4th of July?
Might be out in Vegas. You never know. But just family, man. I'm from Missouri, so you guys are in Iowa, so you're close. But, I like going down to the Lake of Ozarks, or like a lake like that, to where all my friends and family watching the fireworks, and just spending time with family, and barbecuing and a few drinks here and there, and just having a good time celebrating our Independence Day.
Now, of course, your opponent in the main event is Justin Gaethje. He will be making his UFC debut. Obviously, he was a guy that was a champion in another organization. Do you feel as though it's kind of your duty as a guy that's been in the UFC for several years to kind of show that this is the UFC and we're a step above that some of the guys that Justin Gaethje has fought?
Absolutely. I do feel that in a sense that it's it's up to me to exactly just like you said, show this guy like, hey, listen, this is a different world over here. Like, you might be the big dog over there or the big fish in a small pond, but this pond's pretty big and we got some pretty big fish swimming around in it, and he's about to meet one of the biggest ones.
Now, in most of his fights, even though he has a lot of great wrestling skills, he has really done a good job transitioning into a pretty solid striker. However, he sometimes can leave some openings. If you probably watched and taped his fights with Luis Palomino, do you feel with your great boxing, Michael, that sometimes his last in defense is going to be a perfect opportunity for you to land some of those straight combinations that you're capable of?
Absolutely. He punches with his eyes closed, it looks like, or with his head down. He's so sloppy. He just wings and makes every fight 50-50. If you guys are familiar with my fights, I don't play the 50-50 game. That's not part of my game plan. And, I'm not there to take punches. I'm there to give out all the damage and win the fight and get out of there untouched and unscathed. So, he's still raw. He's gotten away with a lot of things because he hasn't faced a guy with great striking abilities. And he's going to have his hands full Friday night.
Now, is there anything at all that you've been doing specifically to prepare for Justin Gaethje?
Yes, I've been wrestling and crapping my ass off, and this training camp has been so heavy on that side, and it's been hurtful, man. I'm not gonna lie. In the middle of training camp, I think I almost had like a breakdown in practice, and started almost crying because the training camp has just been so tough on me because grappling's just on a whole nother level, man. And the beasts that I have in the gym, like the jiu-jitsu guys, like the Burns brothers, and the wrestling, Michael Chandler, and these guys like Desmond Green wrestling me and grappling and just staying all over me and not letting me breathe. But it's been great. Like I said, I love it because these guys got me prepared for Friday night, and they changed my game. I'm bringing my wrestling back in, and you guys might see some old things that I used to wrestle come out in this fight. So if he thinks I'm just going to strike with him, he's got another thing coming because I can't be one-dimensional like I have been anymore.
Now, of course, your fight is the main event of the Ultimate Fighter finale. You're no stranger to the Ultimate Fighter. Does it kind of bring up some memories of when you were on the show, Michael?
Yeah, a little bit. And the memory is I'm so glad I'm not in that damn house again for 6 more weeks. They even offered for me to be on that show, and of course I'm like, hell no. You think I'm gonna go sit in that house again for that long a time? Like, that's hell. Like, a lot of people don't understand what goes through these fighters in that house. Like, we're cut off from the outside world. No phones, no internet, no TV, and it's hard, man. I think they design it specifically to break the minds of these fighters. But, it does bring back good memories as well, because that's where I started my UFC career. So it's good and bad, definitely.
Now, besides your fight, there's also UFC 213 the following evening, also in Las Vegas on pay-per-view. Between that card and your own card, is there any other fights besides yours that you're kind of excited to watch as a fan?
Yeah, I'm actually really excited to watch Yoel and Robert Whitaker fight. Man, I know you guys are familiar with Yoel. He's just a beast. I love watching him compete, and the same with Robert Whitaker. So that's the fight that sticks out to me the most on that card, and I can't wait to watch those guys go at it.
All right, Michael, I'll get you out of here with this. There's anything you wanted to say to Justin Gaethje, and also what can the fans expect from you come Friday night inside the Octagon?
The fans can expect the same Michael Johnson, and that's the guy that's going to go in there and look for a finish and fight, not take too many back steps, and go out here with pressure. I have nothing to say to Justin. I have no words for him, because it's game time right now. We're about to go to war. And, that's it, man. Talk is cheap. What you guys saw at the press conference and in the media of us talking, that's me being fed up. If we could have fought then and there, we would have fought, because I'm not a fan of it all. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit there and let somebody, run their mouth to me. So, no words for him. And, the fans expect the usual, and that's me coming in looking for wins.
He is the Menace, Michael Johnson. You can follow him on Twitter at @FollowTheMenace, and also on Instagram at Menace155. And Michael, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and look forward to your fight on Friday night.
All right, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Once again, that was the Menace, Michael Johnson, right here on Beyond the Cage.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Graham, and on today's show, I'm going to go over the Ultimate Fighter finale, which will be this Friday from Las Vegas, and then, of course, talk about UFC 213 the following day on pay-per-view, also in Las Vegas, Nevada, as part of International Fight Week. Unlike past International Fight Weeks, only the 2 events. The last couple of times they've actually been holding 3, but just the 2 this year, kind of scaling back a little bit from the festivities. However, that doesn't mean that the fights will still not be amazing, and of course they're super loaded with a lot of very, very good fighters, some of the best that the UFC has to offer in their organization. Looking first at the Ultimate Fighter, 6 fights are going to be shown on the main card Friday, July 7th on Fox Sports 1. Also, there are going to be 6 preliminary bouts. Looking over some of those. Really excited for some of those matchups. We're going to have one of the young guns in the featherweight division in Hiroto Ishihara. He's taking on one of the longtime veterans and a guy that was on the Ultimate Fighter Season 5, talking about Gray Maynard. He will be taking on Ishihara. That's going to be the highlighted fight on the Fight Pass portion of the prelims, kicking off at 6 p.m. Eastern. And we're also going to have top 10 bantamweight, actually top 5 I guess would be more apt, because she is ranked number 5, and that's Tisha Torres, as she is taking on Juliana Lima in the women's strawweight division. Getting to the FS1 portion of the prelims, good friend of the show, Jessica Ai, makes her return after about 10 months off. from her loss to Gaethje. She'll be taking on newcomer Aspen Ladd, who is undefeated in her career at 5-0. For those of you who don't know who Aspen Ladd is, she has spent the majority of her time under the Invicta banner as of late and has so far looked pretty impressive. However, despite Ai's recent struggles, she's definitely in for a test against the veteran Jessica Ai. That kicks off at 7 o'clock on FS1 as part of the highlighted prelim portion of the card. We're also going to get some more veterans. CB Dalloway moving up to light heavyweight, taking on Ed Herman. Those are another two Ultimate Fighter guys. Ed Herman, Season 2, I believe, and CB Dalloway, I think, was Season 8, if I'm not mistaken. It was 7 or 8. It's funny because he actually lost that final. Actually was supposed to originally take on Jesse Taylor, one of the main redemption guys, and of course Jesse Taylor I'll get to here in just a minute. Guys that just fell short of making the finale, the final fight, James Krause will be taking on Tom Galicchio. It looks as though this bout will be at welterweight, despite both guys fighting the majority of their career at 155 pounds, so I thought maybe for this fight they dropped to 155, but it looks as though they will stay at welterweight for this bout, and that's the weight, of course, that they competed on the show. This will be Galicchio's UFC debut. Of course, Krause has fought in the UFC several times, and they kept on mentioning on the show that he's the only guy currently with a UFC contract, and obviously a guy that almost won the show. So James Krause, I'm assuming, will continue with the UFC, win or lose probably after this, and excited to see that matchup. I think that's a really good fight. And also, speaking of Ultimate Fighter, two girls that have been on the Ultimate Fighter before, Ashley Yoder against Angela Hill will take place as the highlighted prelim here on FS1. Angela Hill had a really nice run in Invicta, came back on short notice to make her re-return to the Octagon. Didn't win, but had a very it was a very exciting fight, even though she lost against Jessica Andrade, and definitely proved that she is one tough cookie in the process. And she'll be taking on the Spider Monkey Ashley Yoder. And I'm going to look up Yoder. I don't recall her fighting in the UFC post her stint on The Ultimate Fighter. She did. She actually made her debut in December of last year, losing to Justine Kish. That's her only UFC bout to date. All right, well, let's get to the main card here, Ultimate Fighter finale here. For those of you who didn't watch the show, don't worry, not really something that will affect your viewing ability here. Really only two fights involved with cast members, and obviously I already highlighted that, the Krause and Galicchio fight. So and then you'll have the final coming up here in just a minute, but don't let that affect your viewing. A lot of very good fights here. A lot of young guys, and like I said, some veterans who had been on the Ultimate Fighter previously, so I think it's a good mix of some new guys and some young guys as well. Some of those young up-and-coming guys, Jordan Johnson, 7-0 in the light heavyweight division. He'll be taking on Marcel Fortuna, 9-1. Both these guys, not really big knockout guys. Over half their wins by submission for both these gentlemen. Excuse me. So it'll be hard to say whether these two are going to respect each other so much that they don't really go into the grappling game, and just decide to make it kind of a slugfest, or if this will end up being a fight where we see both of those submission skills shine out. Officially, for Fortuna, again, as I said, 9-1, 5 submission victories to his credit. His lone loss by decision. As I said, Johnson is undefeated. 4 of his 7 victories are by submission. So far for Johnson, he has fought once in the UFC. He defeated Henrique da Silva by decision. Before that, fought quite a few times in the RFA promotion, doing very well. I believe might have been their champion, I think, in the light heavyweight division, if I'm not mistaken. And looking at Fortuna, this is going to be his second fight in the UFC as well. He actually knocked out Anthony Hamilton in his last fight. That was back in February. And with Fortuna now fighting at 205, obviously him knocking out a big heavyweight like Anthony Hamilton on short notice, I think is a pretty big deal. And actually, believe it or not, he actually has a loss to Jesse Taylor, who will be fighting for the Ultimate Fighter finale contract or championship, or whatever the heck their calling that, and that was back in August of 2012 for an organization called Dragon House. So, pretty interesting. So, looking at this matchup, obviously Fortuna, despite the submission prowess, obviously does have some knockout power. I mean, maybe he just found it there in that fight against Anthony Hamilton. So, maybe something that Johnson, maybe initially coming into this matchup, maybe wouldn't have to worry about, but coming off that performance and debut, I think it's something you got to look at, because Anthony Hamilton obviously is an extremely big guy. You take a look at it, it's heavyweight, not a guy would say that, gets knocked out easily or isn't a tough guy. So I think Johnson's going to have to look at that and maybe realize, maybe, and he only has one knockout to his own. So it's not like Johnson's a guy that can really answer back. He really hasn't shown that in his career. I mean, his lone knockout was his very first fight back in April of 2014, and has not done that since. So I guess in power, I'd probably favor Fortuna just because we've seen it here at the UFC. Grappling-wise, I don't know, probably a little bit, maybe a little bit of a toss-up there. However, Fortuna has gone through the experience of having a UFC fight before. Johnson has not, despite fighting in a very good feeder organization in RFA. I don't know. We'll have to see who's the better grappler. I think it's kind of a push there, but I think because both are talented grapplers, I think it may come down to the striking, and what Fortuna showed in his last fight, I think I may give a slight edge to the Brazilian in this matchup kicking off the main card. The next fight of the evening for the Ultimate Fighter 25 finale card, that's going to be coming in the middleweight division, as Elias Theodorou will take on Brad Tavares. I think this one's plain and simple. I think if Theodorou can get the takedown and get inside enough to tie up Brad Tavares, he can win this fight. But if Theodorou constantly gets shut down, is not able to tie Tavares, or stays in the clinch, where I think Tavares can actually strike pretty well. I think he showed that in his fight at UFC 203 against Chao Mahagales, which is the last time I remember him fighting, where he won a split decision. Fought in the clinch a lot in that fight against a very talented Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and was able to come away with a split decision, and obviously clearly the better striker. I think that's a very similar matchup to this one. Obviously, I think Elias is a little better wrestler, maybe a little better at takedowns. However, I would say Chao's better at submissions. So for Tavares, I think he's coming in fighting, kind of trying to do the same game plan twice in a row, and I think that really helps, having gone through a tough fight like that against a guy like Chao Mahagales. So I would, or Magalesh, however they say his last name. So I think in this fight, I think Brad Tavares will be super ready for the Canadian Theodorou, and really what we got to see from Theodorou is a little less one dimension, because I think if he goes in with that same attack, I think he's going to have a tough time. Brad Tavares is, I think, a pretty strong fighter. I think he is tough to take down, and he's clearly the better striker. I would say coming in this contest, I haven't seen anything from Theodorou where he's really progressed in his striking post-winning his season of the Ultimate Fighter. So I think for Theodorou, I'd like to see him mix in at least some threat of a striking to kind of get Tavares thinking, because Tavares is obviously going to be worried about the takedown, so you may be able to catch him, even if it's not something with great technique, because he is worried about the takedown, he's worried about the clinch, he's worried about Theodorou making this an ugly fight, which is what he does. So I think if Theodorou sets it up a little more, he will have a little more success, because I think he goes in the typical game plan. I think he's going to have a tough time with Brad Tavares. I think so. All right, next fight of the evening, we're going to get Nick Rourke, if I said that correctly, against Jared Cannonier. Big fan of Jared Cannonier. Dude definitely has a lot of power at his disposal as well. He's a very fun guy to watch, and I'm excited. The last time he was on an Ultimate Fighter card, he, of course, had that fight against Cuta Libre, which was a fantastic fight, back and forth between those two. After then, he took on Glover Teixeira, and not surprisingly, he lost. I mean, that was kind of his, test against the top guys there. And obviously, I'm not sure if he's quite ready for it. Now, Cannonier in the past has, even though he's fought at heavyweight, he has mentioned that he could maybe get down to middleweight. I don't know. He's a pretty built dude. So if he can get down to middleweight, I'm not saying that's a horrible thing. I'm just saying, wow, that I'd be a little amazed at that. He's taking on a guy, Nick Rourke, who's undefeated in his career, 7-0. just 2 knockouts to his credit. Does have 4 decision victories, making his UFC debut. Has fought for Legacy. That was just once. That was back in October of last year. Most recently has fought for an organization called Combat Night, fighting twice for them this year, winning once by decision, and most recently winning by first-round knockout back in April. So, not really sure what to make here of this Nick Rohrer coming out of Orlando, according to SheerDog.com. Again, he did headline Legacy FC 60, so obviously this is a guy that, you know, does have some talent. Obviously, to headline the Legacy card, I don't think is any, anything to scoff at. But Jared Cannonier is a very big dude. He has a lot of power, and does have little submission skills. I mean, he does have 3 submissions out of his 9 victories, but, you know, most people know him as a knockout artist. So, and really, I don't know how good of the wrestling skills are. You know, Nick Rohrer showing a lot of decisions. I don't know if that just means he has a lack of finishing ability, or if that's just really what he goes for. I couldn't really tell you. I have not seen tape of Nick, but I'm excited to see Cannonier, and I think Cannonier is a guy that I'm not sure if he'll ever fight in the lean. I mean, he's already 33 years old, but he's a fun guy to watch, and obviously his power gives him kind of that X factor in every fight that he's in. So I think we're going to see a fun fight, though. You know, we see a guy trying to make his UFC debut. He's undefeated, looking something to prove, and taking on a very solid guy in Cannonier, who probably had to be disappointed by his last fight, despite taking on a guy like Glover Teixeira. Going there and getting dominated for 15 minutes is no fun. So I got to imagine we're going to see a very motivated Cannonier to get back to the winning track. All right, the next fight of the evening here at the Ultimate Fighter finale, we're going to go to the 155 division. I am super excited for this one. I don't even know who to pick now. Most fans know me from Detroit here in Michigan, so you think, of course, I'm going to go with Jakar Close. However, Mark Diakazi, this dude, even though he missed with it, threw a tornado kick in his UFC debut. The young man out of the Congo, undefeated 12-0, much like his counterpart, undefeated 6-0-1 is Jakar Close. And ended up then landing a beautiful counter right hand to win that fight via first-round knockout. So this kid is super exciting in Mark Diakazi. However, Jakar Close is a guy who has solid stand-up, but also some good wrestling. He trains with the folks out there at the lab in Arizona, so you know he's going to be well prepared for this matchup. John Krause in his corner, and he's going to need it because he's taking on a guy that's a very dynamic striker, very powerful, is going to have a height and reach advantage over the Michigander. And obviously, you know, some people I saw, our friend Adam Martin, who writes for several different publications up there in Canada, said he didn't like these two prospects kind of meeting each other. I like it. I would like to see more of this. I mean, this is kind of as good as it gets, I think, in the lightweight division right now. You know, they're similar in age. You know, obviously, Diakazi has a few more fights, but I mean, they're both undefeated. They both come from good camps. SheerDog actually lists him as 7-0-1, but the UFC website has him at 6-0-1, so I don't know how you want to believe in that. The one fight so far for Close, he defeated Devin Powell, really put a whooping on Devin Powell. That was in his debut back in January. That was in Phoenix, the Yair Rodriguez-BJ Penn fight, UFC Fight Night 103. Of his 7 career victories, 4 by knockout. And looking at Diakazi, 6 knockouts to his 12 wins, fighting out of the All-Stars Training Center, originally now training and living in England, even though originally from the Congo. Fought many a time in the Bama organization is really where he cut his teeth before transitioning to the UFC and debuting in December of last year, or I'm sorry, in October of last year against Lucas Sojeski, knocking him out in the second round. He then fought Frankie Perez to a decision, and then that's the fight I was talking about where he threw the tornado kick, didn't land it, but still awfully impressive, knocking out Timo Packalin at UFC Fight Night 107. So he does have the UFC experience on his side. 24 years old, Close 29 years old, a few more years older than the man from Congo. And I don't know, I think I'm really excited. I think, like I said, I think Close, even though he's the shorter guy, doesn't have the reach, I think he's maybe a little bigger physically like muscle size. Wrestling, I have to give the edge to the Michigander. However, striking, you got to give it to the man now from England in the Bone Crusher. You have to. I just think that there are very few guys that can pull off a tornado kick. I can say that with a fact. And you don't even see it that time's being thrown. I don't even know how many times I've seen it thrown in a UFC fight. Maybe once? None? I'm not sure. It don't happen very often, I can tell you that. And he pulled it off with flawless technique, even though it didn't land. So that alone has made me very impressed by this kid. And, boy, I'm excited for this matchup. I think if Jakar's smart, he's going to go in there and try to tie up Diakazi. But Jakar has some solid stand-up, too. He may be looking something to prove against the guy that is a very flashy striker in Diakazi. So I think we could see a good striking match between these two as well. I don't know. I'm looking forward to it. The winner of this fight definitely shoots themselves up the rankings and up the prestige because both these guys are looking to make a name for themselves in the other TUF UFC lightweight division. All right, looking at what's next for the Ultimate Fighter finale, we're getting to the co-main event. It is for the championship of this season of the Ultimate Fighter. And we have two guys that came oh so close the first time around when they were on the Ultimate Fighter to winning. We have former runner-up Diego Lima against former, I guess you could technically call, Jesse Taylor a runner-up because he did win a spot in the finals of his season of the Ultimate Fighter, which, again, was against the aforementioned CB Dalloway, who we were talking about earlier on the prelims. However, there was the whole incident with the limo and being just generally rowdy that got him removed from that spot, and we then saw Amir Sadala, we saw CB Dalloway get that spot to rematch Amir Sadala, and Amir Sadala once again pulled off the armbar to get the victory there. And so far, during his run here on the Ultimate Fighter for the second time for Jesse Taylor, pretty much very similar to his first run. I mean, he's taken guys down, he's held them, he's pounded them, he's gotten some submissions, he's gotten some knockouts. He's looked pretty much like the same dude, just a little older and, a little less hair. I mean, he's looked every bit the guy that was on that season those years ago, and no one has really gotten in his way. And the fact that a lot of these dudes in this competition who are normally 155ers, I mean, that doesn't hurt, but that still has not taken away by his dominance. And Diego Lima's for a very tough fight because he had some problems against some grapplers before in his career, and obviously even on this competition, even though he's been able to kind of stave them off and get to the finals, you can tell that's obviously his weakness. And even though he has a jiu-jitsu background, I wouldn't say he's necessarily a very strong guy coming off his back submitting guys. I mean, looking overall in his career, I'll look up how many submission wins he has here. He only has 4 submission victories of his 12 wins. So like I said, not a slouch or anything, but he hasn't submitted anybody since April of 2011. And in fact, all 4 of his submissions were in his first 5 fights, fighting for organizations like SportX, and actually fought a couple times for MFC, which is kind of a big deal. So yeah, so it's been a while since he submitted anybody. So I would, that's what I mean. I would say that, he's probably not going to submit Jesse Taylor. That's my thinking. My thinking is if he beats Taylor, he's going to have to beat him on the feet and probably knock him out, because I don't know if he can get a decision against Taylor. That's a very tough task. Like I said, Jesse Taylor's pretty much ran through everybody so far in the competition, and if Diego can keep this thing standing, I think he has a chance. Jesse Taylor is a tough dude, not a guy that I'd say has really much stand-up, but I would say he's a relatively tough guy. I mean, he's never been knocked out. He has 15 losses in his career, never been knocked out. Overall, 45 professional fights, not to mention all the fights he had with the Ultimate Fighter and amateur. This dude has probably well over 60 bouts as a mixed martial artist, has never been knocked out. That's impressive. Now, he has been submitted 14 times of those 15 losses. So, it is entirely possible he could get submitted. That seems to be his weakness, maybe kind of like a la Chael Sonnen. But I'm not sure if Diego Lima's the guy to do it. Like I said, even though he has some submission wins, he hasn't submitted anybody in 6 years. And I'm not saying, oh, well, the streak can't end or anything like that. It's just that's not a guy who's actively looking for submissions if you haven't submitted somebody in 6 years. I think that's fair to say. So while that is the weakness of JT Money, I'm not sure if Diego Lima's the guy to tap into the weakness. I think he's going to try to do whatever he can to get back up to his feet to strike and not worry about trying to get in submission exchanges with Jesse Taylor. That's just my thoughts. All right, let's get to the main event. Super excited for this. If you guys on the page here on the MMA Warriors Facebook page have not checking it out already, it's right there pinned at the top of our page. My interview with the Menace, Michael Johnson, talking about his fight against Justin Gaethje right here in the main event of the Ultimate Fighter 25 finale. If you haven't got a chance to check it out, not saying stop right now and go check it out, but after I'm done explaining everything here on this live program, please go check out that video, like it and share it, all that good stuff. You'll enjoy it. It was a great little chat there with the Menace. And the thing about the Menace, and I brought this up with the fight, his biggest strength in this fight is going to be his striking combinations. I would say that he is the more technical of those two strikers, and Justin Gaethje, I think, while he does possess a lot of power, obviously 14 of his 17 career victories are by knockout, I think he can kind of get a little wild at times, and I think he can kind of lead with his chin a little bit, maybe thinking that he can take too much damage. However, Michael Johnson's a guy with the very real power, has knocked out several very tough guys in the UFC, and I think as a fight continues, especially for a fight that is scheduled 5 rounds, those openings that Gaethje kind of gives from throwing a little bit wild could help a guy that's very sound in his combinations, a guy that does have power like Michael Johnson. Now, the X factor is the wrestling. Justin Gaethje has some very good wrestling. Michael Johnson actually came into the UFC as a very accomplished wrestler. If you look at his run up until where he fought as the runner-up of his season of The Ultimate Fighter, was pretty much just a wrestler. He's actually kind of transitioned, and now maybe people consider him more of a striker. And if you listen to the interview I did with him, he really talks about how that was really the main focus of this camp was wrestling. He really wanted to make sure he was prepared if Justin Gaethje wanted to take this thing to the ground, and I think that was a very smart move because you got to be prepared for it. This is a guy that's a very strong wrestler, a guy who has really been able to do whatever he wants to whoever he wants, whatever anybody he's been fighting, and you know, he hasn't beat like the strongest names maybe in a guy that's 17-0, but I mean he's beaten Drew Fickett, he's beaten Jay-Z Calavicante, he's beaten Dan Lazone, he beat Nick Newell, he beat Marvin Gillard, he beat Brian Foster. I mean, he's beaten some solid names. I wouldn't say it's a complete list of nobodies. And the thing I say about this is when people talk about, well, he hasn't fought that great a competition. Maybe not. But the thing is, he's beaten all those guys, number one, and 9 times out of 10, he's finished those guys. If you're going to face inferior competition, then put them away. And Justin Gaethje has put these guys away. So I think that means a lot. I really do. It's one thing to fight cans, but if you're barely getting by cans, that's when you got to look at maybe this guy's not that good. But Justin Gaethje's finishing guys and finishing them decisively and violently. So I think he will be ready for the big time. He trains with the Grudge Training Center in Colorado. Obviously, they've had a host of UFC guys come and go through there throughout the years. So normally I would say, oh, maybe this guy will have jitters. I don't think so. He's been training with UFC guys for several years now. Even though he fought in World Series of Fighting, he's fought for their championship. He's been in the main event. He was the face of their franchise. I don't think he's going to be intimidated by making his walk out to the octagon for the first time. And I don't think he'll be intimidated of Michael Johnson, but he definitely has to respect the skill and the experience of Michael Johnson, a guy who's been fighting in the UFC since 2010. So, you know, he has some good wins mixed in there. He has a win over Tony Ferguson, Danny Castillo, Joe Lazone, Gleason Tebow, Melvin Gillard, Edson Barbosa, Dustin Poirier. Obviously fallen on a little bit of hard times of late, losing 3 out of his last 4 fights, but to guys all in the top 15 at the time he faced him in Beneil Dariush, Nate Diaz, and Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now, obviously, in the Nurmagomedov fight, he really got dominated with the wrestling, so no surprise, again, that it was his focus here against Justin Gaethje. Now, Justin Gaethje's not Khabib. Let's get that straight. Because I think if it's still standing, Justin Gaethje has a chance to stand up and trade with Michael Johnson, whereas it looked like Khabib had no idea, maybe kind of what he was doing for a brief moment, and didn't want anything to do with that from Michael Johnson. So I think, unlike Khabib, Michael Johnson can actually stand in there and go. I think this is going to be a great fight. I think both guys have a equal ability at different areas, and I think we're going to see either Michael Johnson reassert himself as a top 15 competitor in this division, or we're going to see the next big thing in the lightweight division in the highlight, Justin Gaethje. I'm going to hold my picks here for the end, do all the 11 picks in a row, so I'm going to get to 213. Let's do it. UFC 213 coming this Saturday on pay-per-view. Super excited. Let's get to it. Looking at 12 fights here for this card. Looking at the the Fight Pass early prelims. That's going to be kicking off at 6:30 in the East. We're going to see Trevin Giles against James Bojnovic, if I said that correctly, in the light heavyweight division. Actually, we're only going to see 11 fights. They actually, on the UFC website, reprinted Giles against Bosniak twice. So then we're going to see Michigan's own Cody Stamann making his UFC debut against Terrion Ware. For those of you who don't know, Cody Stamann is 13-1. He trains with Darren Cruikshank here at Michigan Top Team in Dearborn, Michigan. For those of you fans from the UFC may remember, Darren Cruikshank was on The Ultimate Fighter Season 12, fought in the UFC, I believe, 8 times, if I got that correct. And now is fighting for Risen Fighting Championships out in Japan. So Cody Stamann is a guy, kind of the next big guy coming out of that Michigan Top Team camp. Also, Randa Marcos used to train at Michigan Top Team as well. That's how she came out of the Ultimate Fighter as well. So this is initially at featherweight. Cody is a more natural bantamweight, however. So it'll be interesting to see how the move up against a little bigger guy in Terrion Ware, nicknamed The Flash, will do here for Cody Stamann's debut, who got this fight, I believe, on like about a 2 weeks' notice. So you also got to factor that in as well. However, both guys are making their debuts, so should be an interesting one, and I am excited to see a Michigan guy get a chance here in the UFC. Also, Rob Font against Douglas Silva de Andrade will be the highlighted Fight Pass portion. Rob Font's actually ranked number 15 in the bantamweight division, so he'll be taking on Douglas Silva here for the highlight part. FS1 prelims, boy, super excited for some of these fights here. In welterweight, Jordan Meehan against Bilal Muhammad. Oh, man, I think this is going to be excellent. Obviously, Jordan Meehan is a very, very good striker, a lot of power, and it's a return back to the sport, not just to the UFC, but back to the sport. This guy actually retired for a little bit, had a very good first round, and then kind of faded. You could tell the conditioning just wasn't quite there after some time away from the sport. If he can correct that, I think he can have he will have a successful relaunch into the UFC in the sport of mixed martial arts. But Bilal Muhammad is a guy that, boy, every time he's been in the octagon, it's been an incredible fight. There has been no boring fight so far from Muhammad, who made his debut against Alan Joblay, nearly defeating Joblay, ended up losing a close split decision. Then he takes on Augusto Montano, knocks him out in the 3rd round. Then, in what was kind of exciting, it didn't last very long, but kind of exciting, he then lost to Vicente Luque, getting knocked out in the 1st round. Then came back and had a very good fight against Randy Brown, beating him at UFC 208. So it's 2-2 so far for Muhammad, a guy that has some really good wrestling skills. I think has surprised a lot of people with his stand-up. He's a tough guy. He has some power as well, and I think will be very competitive. Because Meehan is a guy, excellent stand-up, solid takedown defense, but obviously, as he showed in his last fight, still has some room to work in the grappling department, despite a guy that has 40 professional fights. So if I was Muhammad, you can maybe see him rushing for the takedown, and if Meehan worked on his conditioning and get back up to his feet quick, that's going to really behoove him in this fight. Because even though Muhammad has shown that he is a good striker, guy that's tough, I would say overall Meehan is the more accomplished individual in the stand-up department. Also, in the middleweight division, we're going to see Thiago Santos against Gerald Meerschaert, if I said that correctly. This should be a very interesting bout. We kind of have striker versus grappler. Very powerful striking coming from Thiago Santos, whereas Meerschaert is a submission expert with the majority of his victories coming by way of submission. I'm going to look up officially how many. That's the one thing I don't like sometimes when I look at the UFC website. They listed that he submitted 73% of his opponents. I don't like that stat as much as saying he submitted X number of guys and X number of wins. Officially submitted 19 opponents of his 26 career victories. 26-8 is the product of Racine, Wisconsin, training with Rufus Sport. Thiago Santos, 9 out of 14 victories by knockout. Most recently knocked out Jack Marshman at UFC Fight Night 105 back in February. And once again, spinning wheel kick, that is definitely his go-to weapon. And if this fight goes to the ground, Santos does have some submission skills, only one submission victory, but does have some jiu-jitsu skills in his background. So while I would say he could probably hang with Meerschaert, I wouldn't like it because he did get submitted by Eric Spicely recently, and he did get knocked out by Cesar Fajeda. That was actually in his UFC debut. So he has been submitted a few times here in the UFC, and even though, like I said, he does have some jiu-jitsu skills, I would avoid that altogether against the guy who, that's kind of what he does. So far in the UFC, 2-0, both wins by submission, both in the first round. Anaconda choke and via armbar, most recently the same night as Thiago Silva last fought at that UFC Fight Night 105 card. So this is a guy who definitely, I think, has some skills, but if he can't get this fight to the ground, he's going to have a tough time. Now, the one thing that will be interesting is Meerschaert has had these incredible 35 professional, 34, this will be his 35th professional fight, has never been knocked out. Definitely going to be put to the test against the guy who's a heavy hitter like Thiago Santos. So that should be a very interesting striker versus grappler matchup there on the undercard. And then we're getting to the debut of Chris Camozzi's brother, Brian Camozzi, 7-3 in his career. He's taking on former Ultimate Fighter winner Chad Laprise in the welterweight division. Brian Camozzi, for a guy in the welterweight, is really big. He's going to have a 4-inch height advantage and a 7-inch reach advantage against the Canadian Chad Laprise. So very interesting to see that one in that fight, too. If he's anything like his brother, definitely a guy that will not quit. Then we're going to see a matchup of two top 15 heavyweights as Travis Brown will take on Alexei Olenek, as I said, in the heavyweight division. Travis Brown has not looked, very good as of late. Sure, he had his moments there against Derek Lewis, but still ultimately lost and got knocked out in the first round. Now, granted, his last 3 fights have been against guys that are really good. 2 former champions in Verdum and Velasquez, and then you add in a guy who was a top 10 fighter and a guy on a huge streak and Derek Lewis in the main event. His last win was against a guy who's not even in the UFC anymore, in Matt Mitrione. We all know about that, the eye poke and all that went on in that fight back in January of 2016. So he's taking on a guy that's a super veteran of the sport in Olenek. I believe over 60 professional bouts. This actually will be his 62nd professional bout. Is a incredible grappler. Has pulled off a lot of crazy submissions. And he's pulled off a couple of them in the UFC. So definitely got to give the edge there as he submitted 41 opponents. That's ridiculous. Out of 51 wins. Only been knocked out 4 times in his career. Only been submitted twice in 4 decisions. So he doesn't lose very often. In fact, his loss to Daniel Olmachuk, which was via majority decision, was his first loss in about 4 years. His last loss actually was to Jeff Munson back in M1. Before that, he had a nice string of victories. I think it looks like, if I count correctly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 straight victories, including a win in a rematch over Jeff Munson, a win over Mirko Krokop, and also 2 wins in the UFC over Anthony Hamilton and Jared Rosholt, finishing both those individuals. Also has a win over Tony Lopez, too, in that time. So definitely guys that were pretty talented in that run before finally losing to Olmachuk, where really I remember watching that fight. His conditioning definitely wasn't there. This is a guy who in that streak had only been to, that winning streak I just mentioned, had only been to the third round once. And a guy that is 40 years old. So conditioning, I would have to favor the Hawaiian in Travis Brown, despite other people like, well, I think Travis Brown, it's not that he has bad condition. I think he just kind of wears himself out, throws too much, doesn't really pace himself very well. So and obviously Travis Brown is the younger guy too. So I would give the edge in conditioning to Travis Brown's stand-up. Definitely with the Hawaiian, Travis Brown. Travis Brown, really started his career as a guy that was almost impossible to take down. But really in about his last 5-6 fights, that's kind of switched. He's been able to be, and it really kind of started with that first fight against Fabricio Verdum. Guys have really been able to start taking him down more. They've kind of been able to figure out, and also you can maybe say Brown has... I hate to say he's gotten worse, but he kind of has. He's definitely not the same guy that fought. I don't quite know why that is. You can conspiracy theorist why that may be, but he hasn't really been getting it done the last 2 years for whatever reason you want to say. And that could pick somebody like Olenek, a guy that was definitely towards the end of his career at 40 years old and over 60 professional fights. But because of that, Olenek, I think, has an opening in this fight because of his takedown prowess. Because if he takes this to the ground, I don't really see how Travis Brown deals with that. He's not a guy that's going to submit you off his back. He definitely can get up to his feet, but it's all about can he get that fight to the ground? Because we've seen him a couple times stop people from the clinch with elbows. So this is a guy that is still dangerous trying to take him down. I'm not saying he's now easy as heck to take down, but he's definitely been easier to take down the last 2 years than he had been previously in his UFC tenure. So that does offer a little bit of an opening and hope for Olenek. You also have the fact that he's just looked bad, too. So, Olenek really has nothing to lose in this fight. People are expecting Travis Brown to win despite the 3-fight losing skid. He's fought the better competition, and he's beaten some good competition, too. So, he's the bigger name, especially here in America. And we'll see what Travis Brown we get. Are we going to see the guy that the last 3 fights has looked to shelve his former self? Or if we're going to see the dude that was knocking people out, having crazy fights, stopping people from the clinch. I don't know. We're going to find out. And that's why we watch the fights, and that's why we just do them with me talking or looking at what's going to happen on paper. Getting to the main card here of UFC 213, kicking off in the lightweight division as former lightweight champion Anthony Pettis makes his return to the division, taking on a longtime lightweight veteran Jim Miller. Standing up is obviously going to favor the former champion Anthony Pettis. Now, last couple fights, Anthony Pettis has really got outdone in stand-up, surprisingly, because of his boxing. Anthony Pettis is a strong striker, but it's mainly with his kicks. And if you're able to kind of take those away or dodge them and really come at him with straightforward boxing, as we've seen from Edson Barboza, we saw it from Max Holloway as well, you can kind of frustrate him because his hands are not quite to where his kicks are. And yes, he has very dynamic kicks. He can knock out anybody with those kicks. We've seen it several times in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, but guys have kind of figured him out a little bit. He tried to go down to 45. Yeah, he had that nice win over Oliveira, but then I think had not only a bad performance where, again, he got outboxed by a better boxer, also a guy that maybe mentally was a little kind of broken. He had a tough weight cut. He had some losses in a row. And, I think kind of gave up a little bit mentally in that fight. So I hate to question, obviously he's on the Wheaties box over there. I hate to question this guy mentally, but I think it is a little bit of a question mark to bring into this fight. Where is he at head? He's going back up to 155. He dropped to 145 because he wasn't having that success. So he's coming back up. Maybe that will mentally refresh him. Maybe he's not going to be drained out from the weight cut, obviously. So maybe that puts his head in a better right place. And maybe this is now like, all right, this is my chance to kind of return to the division. I once was the champion. I'm still a guy that's only 29 years old. I still have time left in my career. A guy that I think is still capable of making a title run. I don't think he's completely done. I'm taking a guy that definitely is a solid veteran, a guy that's no slouch. Excuse me. And a guy that definitely, if I'm not careful, can submit me. So I think this is a very nice test coming back for Jim Miller, who was having a really nice streak, after losing 2 in a row to Michael Case and Diego Sanchez, a guy that looked maybe like he was done in his career. Came back and beat Taka Norigomi, Joe Lazone, and Thiago Alves in 3 straight. So, and then, got dominated by a guy that was a better striker in Dustin Poirier. So, I think kind of looking at that fight, that might be very similar how this fight plays out. However, I think if Jim Miller can use just straight boxing to get inside and tie up Anthony Pettis, he's been proven that he can get tied up and lose. I mean, the Eddie Alvarez fight is probably no more better example. It wasn't like Eddie did something amazing. It wasn't a great fight by either, but Eddie did enough to tie up Anthony Pettis. And I think that's got to be Jim Miller's strategy here. You got to tie him up. You got to put him up against the cage. You cannot give him space to throw those very flashy or showtime kicks, if you will. And if he could do that, he can get the victory. But if he's not able to get inside and he can't stop the kicks of Pettis, then he's probably going to get knocked out. I think that's how it's going to go. Either a decision by Miller or a knockout by Pettis. I think that's how this fight will play out. Looking up next here for UFC 213, we got Fabricio Verdum against Alistar Overeem, the trilogy fight. These two are 1-1 against each other, and the winner probably, you can make a case, is the number 1 contender in the heavyweight division. I know Cain Velasquez is out there as well, but I think a win by either of these gentlemen really puts them in good standing to get another shot at Stipe Miocic. Fabricio Verdum currently ranked number 1, Overeem number 3. Since losing the heavyweight title, Verdum went out and dominated Travis Brown at UFC 213. And since Overeem's loss to Stipe Miocic, he went out and was able to knock out Mark Hunt. So, really, even though Fabricio Verdum has really established himself as a very top-notch striker, I would say he should look to take this to the ground. Obviously, set it up with strikes, but I don't think you play around with Overeem on the feet. I think he's still proved, even though they're both older guys. I mean, Verdum 39, Overeem 37. Overeem is still a very dangerous striker, and no matter how much Fabricio Verdum has improved in the striking category, I would say you just kind of maybe leave that be. Looking over the records here, I'm trying to get it. Looks like these two first fought in May of 2006, with Verdum winning via submission in the second round at Pride Total Elimination Absolute. Then the two rematched. I believe that was actually under the Strikeforce banner. Yes, with Overeem winning a unanimous decision back in June of 2011. So this will be a trilogy fight, and it'll be crazy because I'm not 100% sure, but this will probably be one of the few trilogies, at least under a Zuffa brand, where all of them were companies purchased by Zuffa. You had Pride, then Strikeforce, and now they finally do the trilogy here in the UFC. And I'm super excited for this one because, like I said, Fabricio Verdum has really established himself as one of the best strikers in this division. Overeem's obviously very powerful in the striking game, but a guy that has been knocked out, has maybe looked a little chinny a little bit in his career, especially over the last several years, and maybe Verdum can get to him. But I just think his submission prowess is something that is the X factor, and I think that if he can use his strikes to set up the takedowns, tie up Overeem, and take him down, obviously you got to credit Fabricio Verdum. I mean, this is a guy who submitted Fedor Emelianenko. So he's definitely, and he's also submitted Cain Velasquez. So this is the submission guy. So if it doesn't go to the ground, I think it's a little more of a 50-50 fight. I think it could kind of go either way. I would say ultimately the power, though, is with Alistar Overeem. Despite being a very good striker, Verdum doesn't have a lot of knockouts. Only 6 knockouts to his credit. So that's what I'm saying. As much as you want to mix it up and maybe he's, maybe a tad more, I hate to say he's a tad more technically sound. Maybe he's not. But as much as he likes to mix up a strike, we're talking about the dude that has 19 knockouts. Guy that just knocked out Mark Hunt. That dude's ultra tough. Knocked him out. Knocked out Junior Dos Santos. Knocked out Alistar Overeem. Knocked out Stefan Struve. I mean, the only guy that he hasn't really knocked out of any note, that being Overeem, recently anyways, is Roy Nelson. But Verdum didn't knock out Roy Nelson either. So I guess that just shows how tough Roy Nelson is. So I think this is a fantastic fight. and the winner I think should get a shot. I know Cain Velasquez is out there. If Cain's healthy, I have no problem with Cain fighting Stipe Miocic for the heavyweight title, but I think a win by either, I think you make a strong case for a rematch later this year for the heavyweight title. What's next for UFC 213? This gets bumped up because of the Cerrone and Lawler fight exiting the card, so we're going to see Daniel Olmachuk against Curtis Blades. Interesting fight to kind of move up here, but this is what we get. They're trying to showcase two of the unknown heavyweights here. Daniel Olmachuk is coming off that win over Alexei Olenek in his last fight, and let's see. Actually, no, he actually fought twice after that win over Olenek, losing to Stefan Struve, getting submitted, and then having a close split decision loss to Tim Johnson back in March of this year. And I do actually remember both those fights now that I think about it, but I guess just because Olenek hasn't fought since then, I thought, oh, of course, Olmachuk hasn't fought since then, but that is not the case. He is on a 2-fight losing streak. Curtis Blades so far, I believe, is, let's see here, we got 1-1 and with a no contest. That's right, he had a fight against Adam Milstead back in February. I think there was an eye poke injury there. It ended up getting overturned to a no contest. If I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure why that one actually got taken off. From what I remember, I think it was an injury. Trying to look here at that card. It says, well, initially on the UFC website it says winner knockout. I think that was the fight that Blades really hurt Milstead. So there might, obviously I don't think there was a suspension because we're at less than 6 months if there was some sort of drug, but getting it overturned. So. Yeah, I'm not sure why that one got overturned. I'm going to have to look that up here. But Blades had a very good performance despite being overturned in his last fight, so I guess you can make a case he's almost like 2-1 in the UFC. His only loss coming to Francis Ngannou. That was his UFC debut. No shame in that. And both these guys are more known for their grappling. However, Blades is, I think, probably the bigger individual at standing 6'4", and then has all of his 7 wins by knockout. So, actually, on Sheerdog, it still shows the Milstead fight as a victory, not a no contest. And I'm not seeing anything from Sheerdog saying it was a no contest, so I'm not sure why on the UFC website they list that as a no contest. That's very weird. So he is actually 2-1 in the UFC because there was no stories in Sheerdog list or related stories, and nothing says the fight was overturned. So that is weird that when you click on Curtis Blades, it shows that as a no contest, and they actually list him at 6-1, not 7-1. But on the page, they list, I don't know. It is a mess. It's the UFC. Blame them on their website. Only reporting the facts here on Beyond the Cage. No alternative news. And both these guys are very strong grapplers. However, got to go with Curtis Blades. He's the better grappler. He's the bigger dude. I would say overall standing up, I would give Olmachuk the stand-up advantage, but he's going to have a tough time, dealing with the size of Curtis Blades. And he's had some trouble with big guys, in the past. Look at his last 2 fights. He took on the huge monster that was Stefan Struve at 6'11", lost. He took on, in his fight after that, Tim Johnson, who's a very big heavyweight dude that's like 6'5", very close to that 260 limit. Close. He close. He did a good job of, stopping the takedown for the most part, but still lost. So while Olmachuk, does have some nice wins and definitely has more experience, not only age-wise but fight-wise, this will be his. Let's see, what we got here, 29th or 30th professional fight. He's fought 29 times previously. So, yeah. It will be a very big test for Curtis Blades to see if he's for real, and then for Olmachuk, it's a way to kind of reinsert himself back into the top 15, currently still clinging to the 15th ranking in the heavyweight division. Co-main event of the evening. Boy, this one I think has fight of the night, performance of the night, kind of written all over it between Robert Whittaker and Yoel Romero. Really, the key is, will Romero even try to stand and trade with Whittaker, or is he just going to go right into wrestling mode? And if he does, will Whittaker be able to stop it? So far, Whittaker has proven that he can hang with some big dudes in this division, stop the takedown, and then knock him out. He did it against Derek Brunson. He did it against Jacare Souza. He did it against Rafael Natal. Every time he's been tested with a guy that is a superior grappler, Whitaker's been able to keep the fight in his domain standing and has been able to not only win, but in more times than not, get a finish. Like I said, in his last 3 fights, he was taking on a guy that was a superior grappler, and he's finished 2 of those 3 guys. Not finishing Rafael Natal, but still dominating him, in the process. So, since moving up to, middleweight in 2014, he's won every single fight, and he's been proving everybody wrong fight after fight. He's young, he's hungry, he's powerful, and is a dude that has shown that he can keep the fight standing. He can sprawl and brawl. However, of those grapplers, I think this is the strongest one. I mean, he's taken a guy that was an Olympic silver medalist. I know Jacare is a very talented jiu-jitsu guy, but there's a difference between jiu-jitsu takedowns and wrestling takedowns. And I think that is a difference. And also, you also add in the power factor. Even though Jacare is a big, strong guy, he only has 1 knockout in his career. He's a submission guy. He is a pure grappler. However, Yoel Romero is a dude that not only can take you down, but just is a freak of nature. I mean, 12-1 so far in his career, and I think has knocked out all but 1 of his career victories, if I am not mistaken. I'm going to double check this here. Yeah, 10 of his 12 career victories are by knockout. He has 2 victories via decision against Brad Tavares and Jacare Souza. His only loss coming in his lone Strikeforce appearance against Rafael Cavalcante, which I think may have been at 205 pounds. So he has not lost at 185. Debuted in the UFC after that fight to Cavalcante and has beaten everybody has been put in front of him. Clifford Starks, Hani Marks, Derek Brunson, Brad Tavares, Tim Kennedy, Leona Machida, Jacare Souza, and most notably Chris Weidman, knocking him out with that crazy knee at UFC 205. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. We're seeing a guy that is a really good wrestler, has developed with a guy with a lot of power, and even though I would say Whitaker is the better striker, however it stays standing, as much as Whitaker has a lot of power, I got to give the power edge to Romero. I mean, this dude is an absolute monster. But the longer this fight goes, too, because this is a 5-round fight, Romero has conditioning problems. The longer it goes, you got to favor Robert Whitaker, a guy who has fought some of his career at 170. So you got to believe he's going to be the better condition of the two and has the better gas tank of these 2 fighters. So the longer this fight goes, it definitely favors Robert Whitaker. However, Romero's a guy that has been known to get out of fights early with that power. Man, I don't know. It's going to be a very close fight. Both guys are very talented. Both guys are kind of on a roll. Big rolls, big winning streaks. But somebody's got to end their roll and become the interim middleweight champion. It's going to be a fun one, and one I am super excited to see. Main event of the evening, Valentina Shevchenko against Amanda Nunes, this time for the Women's Bantamweight Championship. That is on the line. And we had a comment earlier from Paris Brown, says either by Amanda by knockout or decision. Obviously, those are 2 of the ways she can win. However, I think she has to win by knockout. I don't see Amanda Nunes winning a decision for 2 simple reasons. 1, I don't think she has the cardio to go 25 minutes. And 2, I just think that Valentina Shevchenko is more built for a longer fight, and that's more of her game. I would say she's more of a decision fighter. I mean, I think Nunes has 1 decision victory in her career. So, and that obviously was over Shevchenko and was a 3-round fight. A fight that a lot of people think Shevchenko maybe have won. So, with Nunes winning the first round, Shevchenko possibly sweeping the next 2. Was a very close fight. Nunes gets the victory. However, in a 5-round fight, got to favor Shevchenko. I think that's a fact. Now, what Shevchenko was really able to do in this first matchup was not only tie up Nunes and make her work for positions, she was able to avoid anything substantial power-wise. She never got hit with anything very big, and one of the reasons why she was able to stay in that fight for so long, unlike other opponents Amanda Nunes has faced. So I think that's a huge key in this fight. And also, she's a very good grappler. I mean, now, sure, she got taken down by Juliana Pena, and obviously I think Amanda Nunes can take her down. But off her back, she is very good, despite being a smaller bantamweight. I mean, she's not the biggest girl in this division. I mean, she's given up 3 inches in height to Nunes and 2 inches in reach. And she's giving up reach to just about everybody in this division, but she controls range as a shorter fighter like nobody I've ever seen. I mean, go run back that Holly Holm fight against a girl who's a very good striker and is taller and longer, and Shevchenko was the one dominating the range of the fight. So, standing up, it's going to be very hard for Nunes to hit Shevchenko. However, Nunes has the better power and is still the better finisher of the two. I don't think you can make a claim against that. But the better condition of the two, the more, I would say, technically sound, is definitely the Kyrgyzstan native now, I think, training out of Peru, or has done some training in Peru and South America, in the Bullish Shevchenko. So, the longer this fight goes, it's definitely favors Shevchenko. Nunes, I think, has to be able to figure out how the range, because Shevchenko has proven that that's what she's very good at, and being able to strike at that range and figure out how to do that and land her power combinations. Because I think if she kind of rushes in and goes for takedowns, I really think he kind of helps Shevchenko out, because I think you're going to tire yourself out, and you're really going to favor her moving into this fight as it goes. I think we have to see a more reserved Nunes. That's reserving the power punches, pacing yourself a little bit, because I think if she goes out there guns ablazing in the first round, I think that's a horrible strategy. I don't think that's going to work out this time. I think she's going to have to really feel out that first round. I really do. See what Shevchenko's bringing, see how she's moving in and out, and try to get that timing. I would throw some leg kicks. I would throw a lot of leg kicks because you got the reach with the legs, and obviously with your height as well. Throw the leg kicks, because I don't think she's going to go in there and try to take you down. I don't see that as her game plan. I really don't, because I think she wants to, as much as she wants to get you in those grappling situations, I don't think she's going to attack you that way. I don't. I think she's going to tire you out by running around. And because of that, got to kind of do what I think Cody Garbrandt did against Dominic Cruz. If I were Amanda Nunes, I got to take over that center of the cage. Okay? Take that part over, pivot to check Shevchenko, make Shevchenko just circle around you. Yeah, it's one thing for her to make you chase, but let her circle. Let her circle, because she's going to have to come to you for takedowns, and be ready for those. Get ready for those spots, ready for the power combinations, and get ready to strike when she comes in. And for Shevchenko, I'm not saying that Nunes is going to employ that strategy, but if she does, got to be ready with some nice leg kicks, little ankle picks, kind of mixing some things in there, some tricky things that may give Nunes that chance to make a rush, and that's where you can kind of pounce with the counter and the takedown as well. I think this is going to be a very interesting fight. I don't think it's going to be boring, even though their first fight was a tad boring. I think it's going to be a very entertaining fight, and I think the winner is definitely going to earn it. I don't think we're going to see maybe this girl won. I think we're going to see a definitive ending one way or the other. With that said, let's get to picks, starting first with the Ultimate Fighter finale. We got Jordan Johnson against Marcel Fortuna. I'm going to go Marcel Fortuna. Knocked out a big heavyweight in Anthony Hamilton, so I'm going to go with him in this fight. Brad Tavares against Elias Theodorou. Going to go Brad Tavares. I think Theodorou is going to have a tough time taking the Hawaiian down, and when it stays standing, got to go with Brad Tavares. Jared Cannonier against Nick Rourke. Going to go Jared Cannonier in this one. Really like him. Jakar Close against Mark Diakazi. Gonna go with my Michigan boy here, Jakar Close. I think he's gonna have the grappling to be able to neutralize the very dynamic striking of the Bone Crusher. Jesse Taylor against Diego Lima for the Ultimate Fighter winner fight. Gonna go JT Money. I don't think Diego Lima is going to be able to stop the takedowns of Jesse Taylor, and we're either gonna see a 15-minute decision or perhaps a third round knockout or submission by Jesse Taylor. So I'm gonna go with JT Money. Justin Gaethje against Michael Johnson. Man, even though I interviewed Michael Johnson, I'm going to go Justin Gaethje. I think this is his time to assert himself as one of the top lightweights in the world. If he wasn't already, he's going to prove it here. And I think we're going to see a 5-round war between these two. I think both are going to be able to last the onslaught, but I'm going to go with Justin Gaethje in this one. Getting to UFC 213, Anthony Pettis against Jim Miller. going with Anthony Pettis. I think Jim Miller is going to have a tough time striking with Anthony Pettis and not going to be able to hold him long enough for Pettis to not unleash his signature Showtime kick. So I'm going to go with the former champion, Anthony Pettis. Fabricio Verdum against Alistair Overeem. Going to go Fabricio Verdum. I think that the X factor of him taking this fight to the ground, working Overeem that way, and obviously his striking is a lot better now than either of the previous 2 times that these two fought. I think that's going to be a huge difference in the fight for him to setting up those takedowns. They're not going to be as obvious now. So I'm going to go with the Brazilian Fabricio Verdum to win this trilogy fight. Curtis Blades against Daniel Olmachuk. I'm going to go with Curtis Blades. I think he's the bigger dude. He's the stronger dude. I think the much smaller Oleinik's going to have a tough time dealing with this big kid. So I'm going to go with Curtis Blades. Yoel Romero against Robert Whittaker. I'm going to go Yoel Romero. I think those takedowns are the X factor. Even though Whittaker has great takedown defense, we're talking about an Olympic caliber wrestler here, and I think that's going to be tough for Whittaker to deal with. So I'm going to go with Yoel Romero to win and become the interim middleweight champion. Amanda Nunes against Valentina Shevchenko. You know, I've picked against Shevchenko, I think, almost every fight she's been in the UFC, and so far it has not worked out very well for me. I think maybe except the first time she fought Amanda Nunes. This time around, however, I think a 5-round fight really favors the Bullet, and I think technically she's maybe as sound as any fighter in any division. She's just super fantastic, and while Nunes, again, she's the better finisher, is the little stronger than the two, I think the technically sound game of Shevchenko is going to be the difference in the rematch, and I'm going to go with the Bullet to become the new women's bantamweight champion of the world. Once again, I am Jim Graham. Thank you to everybody that joined in, commented, shared it, liked it, watched it here on MMA Warriors. Of course, you can catch the show on YouTube as well, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. Follow me on Twitter @Jim Graham, and like Beyond the Cage on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. Again, thanks to MMA Warriors. Also like to thank MMA UK, the MMA community, Adam Nelson, a.k.a. Gorilla the Bear. You can see some of his artwork right there. Also like to thank Izzy Garcia, Flying Brian J, MMA Fight Fans on Twitter, and everybody else, Sports Talk 313, AJ Hiller, MMA Signatures USA.com, everybody else who has supported Beyond the Cage each and every week. So, for MMA Warriors and myself, Jim Graham, thank you for listening to another edition here of Beyond the Cage.